Did you know about this Sonic game, Sonic Momentum? Do you know what kind of technical things went into its development? Yeah, it's a lot. But what if I told you all this plays at 60 FPS on your web browser, and I made it all happen within 1 week? Well, let's break it down. So a few months ago, I announced that I was working on a special surprise after a long-awaited silence that was going on with the project Sonic Momentum, which, for those who don't know, is a Sonic fan game made by yours truly. The announcement I made was to bring the game into a direction that is closer to a mobile framework, which is something that requires a lot of setup and knowledge to be able to smoothly transition away from just PC. If you need any more information about it, please refer to my last video as it goes into depth about how the change in direction started. In order to test things out, I decided to focus on Sonic Momentum becoming a web-based game, which was inspired by a well-known little Flash game known as Ultimate Flash Sonic. If you know, you know. But accomplishing this step would be a key point in finally making Sonic Momentum work on phones, especially since most web-based games can be played through modern-day phones. So let's get into things. As discussed before, one of the golden rules I have for this game is to keep things optimized, as to let even the most oldest of PCs capable of running it, because not everyone has access to the more premium and latest tech. On top of that, it's a 2D game, so it's really not going to be game breaking to begin with. But there were a few things that I needed to optimize to be able to get that smooth 60 FPS. For one, I needed more shaders, and I know many of you have heard me bring up the idea of shaders multiple times before. The reason is that phones tend to rely more on the GPU than its CPU for simplicity's sake. As an example, I specifically created two special shaders that handle how platforms are drawn and how the background is laid out. So instead of relying on drawing several different sprites on screen, I just used a shader to project multiple things onto objects, which frees up a lot of effort on the CPU side for more complex objects in the scene. And this was all pre-set up beforehand to get the game ready. The next step is to figure out how to export the game itself to test things out. Luckily, the program that I'm using, GameMaker, has a unique feature to upload games through GX Games, which utilizes Opera GX's WebGL API. Not really important to know other than it's one of the standard languages next to HTML5 in the modern day of web graphics. But one problem is, Sonic Momentum was built off of GameMaker 1.4, which is pretty old, and GameMaker is actually on its second version, which has a completely different format that I'm not used to. So what did I do? I powered through and just ported everything over. I did have to get used to GameMaker 2's UI and different features, but it's nothing I couldn't handle. Which, thankfully, since the game was heavily optimized to be able to export into C++ native language, only brought about a few errors when transitioning over. See the power of the golden rule? Make sure it's optimized. Now, for the final unveiling of working on the web browser. It worked, surprisingly. And honestly, I was expecting more graphical glitches or something going completely wrong, but visually, everything works fine. Only one small problem. The controls seem to have broken. Well, the code behind the scenes was definitely slapped together, so a rewrite of it was already needed to begin with. Especially since if this is going to be on mobile browsers, we're going to need some touchscreen capability. So after perusing some articles on GameMaker's resources and manuals, I finally tested it out on my own phone. And despite the screen layout to be a little bit wonky to adjust to my phone screen, everything seemed to work as intended. Again, which was odd, but I wasn't going to argue with it. I double and triple checked if there was anything I missed, still nothing. So I went on GX Games, posted it, released it for people to test out, and waited. And while I was waiting, I thought to myself, wow, I really just released a game that worked fluidly on your browser. And I was hoping that everyone could get some bit of nostalgia, just like with Ultimate Flash Sonic, but set in the modern day. No, I'm not the first person to do this kind of stuff, but to set such an ambitious bar, having to go through so many iterations of testing, and providing unique visual effects approaches that modernizes Sonic handheld pixel art aesthetic, I think it's a pretty daunting feat. But when the first results came in, we actually got these. So what did I miss? And what's going on with these screenshots? Well, the common thread amongst all these comments is that these people were playing on an Android device rather than an Apple device, which is the one that I have. But this still didn't tell me what was going on, let alone what specifically was causing this graphical issue. Well, after turning some features off and testing it on my friend's phone, I managed to hone things down to something that was going on with the shaders. Specifically, the on-screen particle effects that gives the environments that digital aesthetic to them. And you want to know what was missing? This simple line. Yeah, no, I'm serious. Basically, after doing some digging, Android devices by default use low precision float values to save on battery life, while iPhones use high precision floats by default. Floats are typically just values from 0 to 1, which is how the GPU handles data, and the precision refers to the accuracy of how far decimals can go. The more precision, the smaller fractions the GPU is allowed to go through, and the bigger the number you're allowed to have. Now, this area of computer graphics isn't really my area of expertise, since I'm mostly just a visual effects artist, but setting things to use a high precision value by default fixed all of the shader's visual bugs on Android devices. It still baffles me to this day how that was the case. And with all that summed up, Sonic Momentum is fully working on your web browser for anyone to play, with more updates underway, and even though I didn't make a formal announcement, Sonic Momentum is also available as an APK to directly download onto your Android device. So yes, this game is fully playable at 60 FPS on mobile. Bet you didn't see that coming. Now, speaking of what's coming soon, allow me to go through them really quick. The next big update will consist of 7 more new Cyberspace levels, with completely new zone types that will aim to push for more visually diverse environments, some that you might have seen before. Now that things are running smoothly on all platforms, I aim to push my knowledge in revamping a lot of the visual effects in a stylistic way, to offer more clarity and oomph to the combat. There will also be more emphasis on combat areas since a lot of people have been asking for that, though these areas will not affect your time, and will instead be extra hidden areas that you can find, much like special stages, which will grant you some special rewards. And if there's going to be more combat, we have to introduce a combat-oriented character, such as Knuckles the Echidna. He will be returning to Sonic Momentum with an updated moveset, and will be available to test out in a mini update posted on the GX version of the game. So, in order to stay tuned for what's to come, why don't you subscribe to keep up with all this momentum? It only takes about 2 seconds for this absolutely free and valuable content, and you can always change your mind later. Mr. Bane out.